Welcome to the Athletics Week in Football, brought to you by BOYLE Sports. Well, it's just 1 week into the Premier League season and we've already seen a few surprises. Who has changed the most over the summer and how might that affect the season ahead? Right, let's get into this, gentlemen. We've got JJ Bull and John Mackenzie. Right, John, Manchester City. 4-0 against Wolves. Very tasty, looked very exciting. From where you were watching, what do you think Pep Guardiola's tweaked over the summer?
Well, obviously the big problem that City had last season was conceding chances that were too big. Pep Guardiola, I think, sets his system up in such a way that he is going to concede transitions. But the problem last season is that those transitions were resulting in very high value chances. So I think what I had in my mind going into this season was, what are the things that City are going to do that are going to stop those big chances from being created? Now, I've got a quote here from Pep Guardiola from last season. This is in a post-match press conference after they lost to Bournemouth. And he said, transitions didn't actually happen that much. It was more that when we pressed high and they played long, we lost the ball. They then won the second ball, and after that they ran. So I think that what happened in the past with City is that we would see that thing that you always see with Pep Guardiola teams, where they try and get territorial advantage, where they squeeze the opponent deep into their own box. And the reason they do that is because even though you're leaving a lot of space to defend, if the opponent do win the ball, they have to get the ball forward a long way and they have to get there with their players. And often what you do is you'll play the ball into the channel, and City are well set up to be able to defend that, and you're usually only attacking with a few players. What we started seeing last season, I think, was teams finding more efficient ways of attacking in those kind of moments. So the ball would go forward and the opponents would then start structuring themselves to actually attack the second balls, to actually give themselves a better chance of having their players move up the pitch and then win the ball back, and then have the players to be able to have these transitional moments. So I've got an example of this happening in the game from the weekend to show the sort of thing that Guardiola wants to stop happening. Wolves here building up from the back. The outside centre-back has the ball and he's going to play the ball into the channel in behind Ryan Aït-Nouri to try and generate some kind of upside for Wolves. But if we actually look at the situation, the structure that Wolves are in, you can see they've got two forwards up against the two centre-backs, and then they've got another forward who's dropped off. But City have 6 players in this area. So the idea is that City have the advantage, the numerical advantage, which means that even if they don't win the first ball, in the second ball, they should have a good chance of being able to retain possession. And we can see when the ball actually does come in, they're aiming for Jørgen Strand Larsen because he's a tall striker. The other forward is going to run in behind so he can run onto the flick on. But I think the really interesting thing to note here is that at this point, around the ball, 6v3 still in City's favour. But as the play breaks down, actually what ends up happening is that City do win the first ball. A pass is played into Johnny Reinders here. But at the point at which the pass is played, you can see now that Wolves have actually structured themselves much better for that second ball. So in the event now, we've got around the ball actually a 4v4. So Wolves have gone from having a massive disadvantage numerically to having parity. They've both got the same number of players here. And as a result, Wolves have a really nice way of being able to actually access the ball, close the ball down and win it back. So that's what Pep Guardiola was talking about. Ball's going in long, losing the second ball, and then you end up with this scenario now, which is 4 Wolves players attacking the City back line. There's 5 City players there, but this is a massive numerical advantage from what they had at the beginning. So this is what teams are trying to do to cause City problems, trying to get the ball into forward areas centrally, break the ball down, win the second balls, and then attack from there. But I think what's really interesting from this game is it was very clear that City were aware of this. They wanted to stop teams from being able to build through the middle. So you can see that Wolves are only able to get 23% of their attacks through the central areas. Everything else was being forced out wide. And that's because I think City were trying to emphasise stopping those central attacks, and as a result actually allowed space to be on the outside, which maybe introduced some weaknesses. We'll get onto that. Let's have a look at how they did that. So this is the beginning of the second half. There's a few things that we should notice here. City are pressing up, and as Pep said in that initial quote, when we're pressing up, often it was leaving space that teams could then access. And to counter that, I think the first thing to notice is that Nico Gonzalez is playing much more of a zonal role here. An emphasis on blocking out the middle, not allowing the opposition to get control in the middle. But the problem is that broadly speaking, City are man-oriented here. You can see that almost all the players are up against their opponent. If you have a player who is playing a zonal role in this, that means there's going to be a free player somewhere. And you can see that free player is here because Doku has stepped up from the outside centre-back onto the central centre-back. So Matt Doherty now has a huge amount of space to work with. So you're allowing a weakness outside of the centre, and that also raises questions about whether or not weaknesses are going to be punished by the opponent. Because actually, if we look at the other City players, we can see they're all very centrally located. This is the line of the players outside the fullbacks, which means that the fullbacks, as you can see, both have 2v1s against them in the wide areas. So City are blocking out the middle, allowing those weaknesses to drift outside. So let's just see how this play breaks down then, because I think there's some interesting things that show up from it. So the ball goes back to the goalkeeper. The goalkeeper is pressured by Haaland, but as we've seen, this is a huge amount of space for Matt Doherty to be in. So that's an easy pass for a Premier League goalkeeper of however their ball playing ability. When that ball is going forward, I think the interesting thing to note is, again, Nico Gonzalez's role. So the ball is coming forward and you can see he's dropping into the back line. And this is something that we're seeing happening a lot more frequently at the top level of the game, that you use your defensive midfielder to drop into that back line, because what that allows you to do is to retain the advantage you have, the +1 advantage here when the outside player goes wide. So again, making sure you're emphasising keeping the centre of the pitch blocked out. The problem is that this player is so free, is able to take the ball down. No one can get close to him before he starts carrying the ball forward, and now you're in a situation that no one manager wants to be in. That is, you've got a player on the ball who's not under too much pressure at this point in time. He's got momentum, and he has two players in front of him running at the back line in a 2v2. There's plenty of space to attack, so you can play that ball down into the channel and have runners onto it. This should be a fairly easy way of generating a chance, and that's how it transpires. So Guyana Hoover, the wing back here, gets the ball in space, and as you can see, because City are now transition defending, there's a lot of space that is opening out in their defensive structure, and in the end, Hoover plays the ball into the middle. Jorgen Strand Larsen finds himself in space and then just puts the ball wide of the post. So this is really interesting, I think, from Man City point of view, because we've seen them blocking out the centre, allowing weaknesses in the wide areas, and it's been okay. They've got away with it because the logic is it's harder to generate from wide areas than it is through the middle. The big question is what happens in the future when they come up against teams who maybe are going to exploit this better than Wolves did, and I think that will determine how good City's season is going to be from a defensive point of view, how good they are at stopping these weaknesses from opening out so obviously, and how good they are at defending the central areas when the ball does come in.
Well, the thing is, from what you're saying, if Wolves had a little bit more quality, perhaps they could have punished Manchester City. And actually, looking at City's next three fixtures, Tottenham, Brighton and Manchester United, whew, that could be really tricky. And that brings me nicely, JJ, to my next question. Let's talk about Manchester United, because I know they lost to Arsenal, but I was watching that thinking, Manchester United look pretty good.
I agree. And the last time we played Arsenal, they drew with them, which sounds like a much better result. However, when we look at the numbers, something else is revealed. For example, in the game they drew against Arsenal last season, towards the end of the season, United only had 32% of possession. Arsenal obviously had much more. And United hardly had any passes. They made a lot of tackles. They didn't have control of the game at all. And the way they controlled the pitch, very much just in build-up. They couldn't really keep the ball. Arsenal were able to get at them. But when we look at the game that happened last weekend, when they lost to Arsenal, we saw a much improved United performance. We can see it in the way they have more possession. It's not always the thing you need to win, but it shows you got more control of the game. Much more shots, much more passes, and Arsenal having to commit a lot more fouls against them, having to break up play more because United have more of the ball. And I think a lot of that is to do with the attacking players they've brought in, which just makes them better. You can build up in the same way, but it's just improved because those players are better on the ball. There's time to structure as well. And I was thinking, were they actually even that bad last season? Because they looked it, and I think they probably still were. But if we look at the expected goals that they had towards the end of the season per game, there's a lot of games where they actually won the game on XG, but lost the game or drew it. And if they have players who then overperform their expected goals, or at least match it, these should over time turn into better results. Yeah. So draws turn into wins, and losses turn into draws or wins. This is what you get. But if we look at how United actually played, we see even more. More is revealed to us. So United building up from the back. When they then launch the ball forward, there are players now who can actually win the ball when they're in contested areas. Now, in the past, when the ball drops loose from a long ball out from the goalkeeper, players aren't in positions, they don't win the second ball, then their team can go at them, then they win possession, which is how Arsenal have so much possession in the last game that they played. But now what we're seeing, United have players in position ready to go. So when the ball bounces loose from one goal kick up the pitch, you have a player picks it up in the midfield, and instantly Bryan Mbeumo is ready to go, making the right run in the right time, is threatening. They're actually scared of Mbeumo running in behind. And so they generate a big chance from just building from the back, playing it backwards, launching it forward, something they couldn't do last season, in my opinion. And you see it multiple times. So another example from the same game, India hits the ball forward very high up the pitch. United players contest it with Arsenal players, it drops loose, but now what you've got are players in the right positions to deal with the second ball. They're a bit more compact than they were last season, which just removes a huge amount of space for their team to counter them. So when players step forward to try and step in to win the second ball, sure enough, in this example I'm showing on a board, Arsenal pick the ball up. But United now have players in position to be able to counter this, to get aggressive and tight to it. This is what you want to see from them, because last season they were really easy to play through. Now, there's an example where Saliba carries the ball forward into midfield, but again, once he reaches the danger point, United's midfielders are in position and ready and aggressive to step in, cut the chance out, and it breaks it down. And when they do that, they then have players in position, not too far out of the game, so they'll be exposed if Arsenal go forward, but in position to attack straight away. And because you have players like Cunha and Mbumo and Dorgu even, just players who are actually really good going forward, they offer a threat. And so what we see basically is United look far more organised, much more structured. They close the gaps between the forward line and the back line, players in position to be able to win that midfield. Now, there's caveats. I think Arsenal weren't quite at it, so I think that's relevant, and it's only the first game of the season. So there's a lot more that can be pulled apart if players do it. But what we see is a more aggressive, more organised, and more physical Man United, and that will make a huge difference.
Physicality, that got me thinking. On the opposite side, for Arsenal, there is one henchman, very physical, Viktor Gyokeres, who I guess some might say probably didn't have the debut in the Premier League he would have wanted.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were focusing on some of his technical skills. There was a few misplayed passes, a few trips over the ball, looked a bit clumsy at times. But I think watching it back, the thing that really stood out to me was the physicality compared to Premier League centre-backs, because we know that he's been able to dominate the Portuguese league. The big question when he was brought over was, how is that going to translate into the Premier League? And I think worrying signs there a little bit, because I felt as though Matthijs de Ligt in particular was just able to deal with them, particularly with aerial balls, so balls that Arsenal were starting to play long. You expect a physical striker to be able to bring those balls down, bring your teammates into play. This is everything we've been talking about today almost, is like winning second balls, being physically available in that part of the pitch where the keeper can access it by going long. And if he can't do that in the Premier League, if the physical level is too high for him, then it's maybe a bit of a worrying sign. It's obviously very, very early days. It's not even 90 minutes of football for him, 60 minutes of football. He'll have time to start fitting in England. He will obviously get up to speed, and I think things will look a little bit better in the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's very early days for everyone in the league, including champions Liverpool. I want to stay with you on this one because they've made a whole heap of changes, some brand new players over the summer. They got the result, but there are still a few bits in that match where you're thinking, is the team clicking yet?
Yeah, the big word for me, I think, watching Liverpool over the last few weeks has been risk. Because I think the narrative that we had last season was, we've got Jurgen Klopp, and he's like, the big heavy metal football guy, and then you bring in Arne Slot, who's introduced a level of control, and he's the guy who sort of brings the stuff that Klopp was lacking. But actually, I think watching these games, it's remarkable how much more risky I think Liverpool have looked in the last few weeks than they did last season. And this is something that not only I have noticed, other people have noticed as well. So there was an interview after the game on Sky Sports where Arne Slot was being interviewed by Jamie Carragher, who was interested in the question of risk. Why was it that the goals that Liverpool gave away when they were in a position of being 2-0 ahead, was there so much risk being involved? This is Arne Slot's response. So he said, we need to find a better balance in taking risks. So balance and risk, both important words for what we're talking about here. Because against Palace, so that was in the Community Shield, we've lost 2 or 3 simple balls that led to counterattacks. And here, for the 2-1 goal, we lost the ball with a trick as well with Dominic Szoboszlai. So I thought I would run through both of the goals and just see what he's talking about here in terms of the balance and the risks involved. So this is the first goal that Bournemouth scored, and both of these goals involve Liverpool attacking and then losing the ball. And I think the really interesting topic to talk about here is the structure that Liverpool have in their possession phase when it then becomes an out of possession phase. So the word that a lot of tacticos use to talk about this is rest defence. Rest defence is simply what happens when to your attacking structure when you lose the ball. Are you well set up to be able to stop the opponent from getting advantages here? And the point that Arne Slot makes in the interview with Jamie Carragher is that a number of times in these plays, you look at the rest defence, the way that the team is structured, and things look relatively fine. So this is the point at which Bournemouth win the ball back from Mo Salah, and Arne Slot would say, well, look, we've got 2v1 against the striker with our centre-backs, and then across the rest of the pitch, all of the players are, within distance of their marking responsibilities. And he clearly thinks about rest defence in terms of man-orientated ideas. So he wants to make sure that your players are going to be close enough to their opponents so that when the ball comes to them, you can immediately jump in there and you don't allow them any sort of possession on the ball. That's all fine because that's a good way of doing rest defence. But the problem is in this situation, there's a couple of players who stand out to me. One of which is Antoine Semenyo is in advance of the fullback here. Now, the ball is on the far side of the pitch, so you would think, well, the fullback has plenty of time to get back into position. And the fullback does have plenty of time to get back into position, but as soon as you start introducing these sorts of distances with the opposition player in advance, you're ripe for being exploited. The same is happening here on the other side of the pitch. This is more worrying because it's on the ball side of the pitch. So you've got McAllister ahead of Marcus Tavernier here. And this becomes an issue when the ball is turned over, because at the moment when the ball then comes out, when the centre-back just clears it, it does fall to Marcus Tavernier. Marcus Tavernier is now in space, and Liverpool have to respond to this. They can't allow a player to just move the ball forward unhindered. The way that they do that is that they do a series of jumps. So Endo, who's playing right back here, is going to jump up to Tavernier. He's going to be leaving David Brooks free, and as a result, Konate is going to step up to David Brooks. That's fine. That's precisely the way that the structure is designed to be able to absorb these kind of situations. And actually, in the event, Marcus Tavernier just plays the ball straight into Endo and bounces out to Mohamed Salah. So you think, job done. Rest defence worked perfectly. But the problem is that Liverpool have the ball again, and their rest defence structure has changed, right? So we've already talked about before they had a 4v3 at the back. Now they've got a 3v3 at the back. So your back line is 1v1 against the opposition. So you've lost that little buffer in having an extra player because Endo stepped forward. Not only that, but when the ball goes back to Mohamed Salah, Endo, the fullback, thinks, well, this is a great opportunity for us to actually cause a problem for Bournemouth. So I'm going to make an overlapping run here, get into this wide channel. The ball's obviously going to go back to Dominic Szoboszlai, and he could maybe find that channel ball. The issue is that when the ball goes to Szoboszlai, he plays, in Arne Slot's phrase, a trick. So he tries to flick the ball between his legs to Florian Wirtz here. And this is a problem because he's got two players around him. He's playing with momentum, so he wants to flick the ball through to Wirtz and then run into the space that opens out. If that doesn't go well, we end up with the same situation with Bournemouth players ending up in advance of where the ball is, and that becomes a problem because the Liverpool players who are supposed to be marking them, the rest defence, will be on the wrong side of the ball. And that's exactly what happens. The trick doesn't come off. We can see Szoboszlai is now in advance of the ball. We've got two Bournemouth players here around the ball, and then we have this series of 1v1 matchups in a 3v3 at the back. This is a huge amount of space. Adams can just play the ball in behind. Look how much space he's got to play with. And they end up with this situation where you have a 3v3. The rest of the team is completely disconnected because of the rest defence position they had. They weren't able to get back in time, and David Brooks can just play the ball into this area here, and lo and behold, Antoine Semenyo, who we talked about was already in advance of his fullback, is in advance of his fullback, and is actually able to get to the ball before the Liverpool defenders. So risky play. The rest defence was fine, but it wasn't fine when they started taking additional risks, trying to play flicks when there wasn't the structure there to justify that kind of play. Let's have a look at the other goal, because this is interesting in maybe a slightly different way. But again, this is now 2-1. So Liverpool in danger if they concede a goal of dropping points from a position of being 2-0 up. Ball goes out wide to Mohamed Salah. Mohamed Salah has the ball with him. Joe Gomez is now the fullback. He's been brought on and Endo's been moved centrally. And in this situation, he's doing the same thing that we saw Endo doing before, which is, okay, Salah's got the ball, let's try and stretch the play. I can either get the ball in behind or I can drag players with me, open space out for my teammates, which is fine. The play goes on, Salah cuts back inside. He's going to try and access his teammates in the box. Gomez has continued his run, so he's nearly at the byline. And we're back at rest defence because there's an issue here, because with Gomez moving forward, a huge amount of space opens out behind Salah that if they lose the ball is accessible. And that's the point, it's accessible. There's Bournemouth players who can get into that space ahead of Liverpool players. And I think this is interesting because this is something that Slot talks about in his interview with Jamie Carragher. He says, if you stop the play at the moment Mo loses the ball, there's not such a big problem. I think the rest defence is in order. So he's saying, I don't think the structure is a huge problem here. But then he says, then they came with 3 or 4 out of nowhere. And I think that's the issue here, right? It's that when the ball is turned over, so we can see the ball, Salah plays a pass which doesn't arrive at the teammate, Szoboszlai slides in to try and stop it, but then at the point at which Hamad Traore picks the ball up, there's now 4 Bournemouth players who have access to that space ahead of Liverpool players. That's a really heady concoction for a team trying to defend in transition, because what ends up happening is very quickly you end up with 4 Bournemouth players attacking the 2 centre-backs who are the only players who can actually access that space well enough. And any Premier League side, no matter what level they're at, if they're doing a 4v2 against any centre-backs will have a really good chance of creating a good chance. That's actually what happens. And so this is the interesting thing for me, I think, about Liverpool this season, is how do they find that balance? That's the word that Slot used at the beginning. He said the balance between being too risky and not being risky enough and wanting to actually score more goals. If they can get that balance right, then yeah, no problems. But if they take a while to get that balance right, then they will be in danger, as they were in this game, of dropping points against some of the teams. And the end of that interview, Jamie Carragher said, "Can I be honest, Arnie? That worries me a little bit," when Arne Slot was justifying the way that he structures his rest defence. So really interesting game from Liverpool. Liverpool will be fun this season. It is going to worry some of the fans though, I think.
What more will be fun this season is you saying Viet!
Viet!
Once more! I love that. And also the phrase rest defence, first time I've ever heard that, so thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Now, one of the most important parts of Arne Slot's new Liverpool are his fullbacks. Here's Sam Tighe, who's digging a little deeper.
Welcome to What's Changed, presented by BOYLE Sports with me, Sam Tighe. Milos Gyokeres has had a difficult start to his Liverpool career. Unsurprising, given how different his role now is. So what's changed, and how can things improve? At Bournemouth, Gyokeres carved out a reputation as a flying fullback. His non-stop running took him up and down the sideline, and sometimes into the box too. He was one of the team's top ball carriers, received lots of forward passes, and made a lot of crosses, helping him to 5 assists last season. But for Liverpool, he's not been tasked with any of this, at least so far. He's basically acting as a third centre-back in build-up, which heavily restricts his forward movements, which meant in the opening game of the Premier League season, his final third impact was minimal, evident in both his passing and his touches. This role also spotlights his 1v1 defending, which isn't his strongest attribute. However, the return of Ryan Gravenberch may help matters. The Dutchman could drop into the defensive line instead, allowing Gyokeres to fly forward once again.
One team I want to talk about is Spurs. I guess they look a bit more robust. How is Thomas Frank different to Ange Postecoglou in terms of the way he's dealing with this Spurs team?
Well, I'm going to try and show you, because we talk about Liverpool being fun. Spurs used to be really fun to watch, but not always for their fans, because the way they played was very intense. Lots of intensity, a very high line, but very low chance prevention. So they were quite fun to watch, but they let in a lot of goals and chances, and they finished very low down the table, as you may recall. Now, when Thomas Frank came into Spurs, I thought, well, he might make them much less fun. They'll be harder to break down. The games will become more boring, because Brentford are very effective. And over the time he's been there, he's managed to really overperform the players that he's got. And my theory was that when he went to Spurs, it would just be more of that, but maybe a bit better because he's better players. But what we're seeing is a little bit of what Spurs can do and did under Postecoglou, and what Thomas Frank has already got them doing. He's got them doing Brentford things already. And the Brentford things that we saw from the last few seasons are that they're intense when they need to be, but not always. They don't try and control games. They don't try and always play it through the middle or wide. They change depending on the opponent. They're pragmatic. But one of the things Brentford definitely did, and we're already seeing at Spurs, is treating every single stoppage in play as a set piece. So that's things like goal kicks, throw-ins, but even kickoffs. So Brentford scored a few goals in the last few seasons where they have a little plan from kickoff. Now, in the Premier League, what happens every single week that I seem to see, I went and watched some kickoffs last week for no real reason, is the ball goes backwards from the kickoff, the goalkeeper has it, and he launches it forwards. And so the opposition just drops back and deep to make sure they can deal with the first ball and the second ball. And Spurs, against Burnley in the first game of the season, knock it backwards, the goalkeeper gets the ball. And so everyone retreats and they chase up the pitch, because that's what you're going to do. But that leaves a huge amount of space for players who haven't gone up forward to be able to receive the ball. And this is where the set piece plays out. So the ball goes from the goalkeeper straight to someone wide on the right. They can then launch the ball to the other side of the pitch, because another thing Brentford would do is try and switch the play from side to side. If a team is blocking centrally, that's a way to try and open up gaps between them. So then what Spurs have done within like 2 or 3 kicks is generate a massive chance to score within the first few seconds of the game. This is very much a Thomas Frank thing to do. So we're seeing his fingerprints, his puppetry all over the Spurs team straight away. But we've also seen the Spurs being super aggressive and intense, like they were in the Postecoglou, playing against PSG. They're one of the best teams in the world. Love watching them. What we saw from the very start of that game is they weren't going to let PSG have the ball. They went straight for them, pressing really high intensity, straight from the off, trying to force throw-ins high, not giving them any time or space on the ball. And that intensity, so combine that intensity that they had under Postecoglou with a bit more control deeper, should make them a lot better, because when they don't have the ball, they're then not going to always be super intense and try and push them high. They'll drop into more pragmatic situations and make sure that they're not going to allow teams to play through them. And even more interesting about that PSG game is the way that Spurs score both of their goals are from free kicks. So they are really intense with the way they play. They keep the ball, they draw the free kick, they score 2 goals that way, and that is how they manage to compete against them. But then we see them play against Burnley and score one of the goals of the season basically on the very first day. And a flowing move where every single player on the Spurs team touches the ball. Every single player touches this. So we're moving it from side to side. And when they move it to the right-hand side, they have 2 players spare on the left-hand side. So Brentford would always do this. They would play down one side, there'd be players who are spare on the other side, so you can switch it to them. And so what you see is Spurs building the chance. Kudu's bit of skill to go past his man near the box, chips it to the back post, and Richarlison scores a bicycle kick, which I'm not sure is really what they planned, but it's a great goal. And so what I think you are seeing are parts of like better players than they had at Brentford doing magical things with the ball, but they've got structure. They're not always doing the same things Postecoglou was doing. They're combining intensity, they're combining their aggression, organisation, and treating certain things as set pieces, and they're just getting all of it all of a sudden. I didn't think Spurs would look this good so quickly, but based on what I saw against PSG and then the way, and it was Burnley. We were probably going to get relegated, so maybe a caveat there again as well. But they just look like Thomas Frank's already got them playing the way he wants to, and that will make them a lot better.
Spurs looking good, dare I say sexy football from Thomas Frank and his boys. Would they look even more sexy if Eberechi Eze had chosen them instead of Arsenal? Anyway, let's talk about Sunderland. Big team, promoted, you had them to go down and so did I. But what an opening day. Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to take your losses when they come. It's a very impressive performance from them against West Ham. And I think maybe the worries and concerns that I had going into the season for them is that their transfer strategy was very different depending on which part of the pitch you were looking at. So in the forward areas, we talked about all of these exciting players they were bringing in. Habib Diarra, we've got Talbi, we've got Siddiqui, Adingra. These are all young players, exciting players from around Europe where you're taking a bit of a risk to bring them into the Premier League at the age that they're at and hoping that they'll immediately fit in. But I think we saw at the weekend that they just looked match ready for this team. So already maybe one of the concerns there starting to be slightly allayed. The back line for me was a concern given that it took Sunderland a little while to start actually bringing in players for that, but now, yes, okay, in this game we had Ronaldo playing at fullback, but the rest of their defence was championship players. But actually, Sealt goes off at one point, Alderete comes on, so already you're adding a little bit more quality and experience in there. We've also got Mukiele is ready to start when he recovers from his injury. Arthur Masuaku, Premier League fans will know from his time at West Ham, so suddenly that back line is looking a little bit more maybe experienced and Premier League ready as well. I think the thing that really stood out for me was Granit Xhaka, because I think what you look at with these sorts of teams when they come up is, oh, well, they have like one way of playing. So Sunderland definitely have the team to be able to play direct. So you might expect, well, the way that they're going to play is, sit a little bit deeper, try and find openings through direct play when they arrive. If teams know that and find ways of stopping that, then do they have alternative ways of playing? Tactical diversity is actually a really useful thing to have. I think Granit Xhaka is super useful for that tactical diversity for Sunderland, because what he was doing in the game was just being able to knit front and back together in build-up. So it wasn't the case that Sunderland had to always go long. Sometimes they generated openings, they moved the West Ham press around a few times, and Granit Xhaka is just such an intelligent occupier of space, but also tempo player. He knows when to move the ball into more dangerous areas. He knows when to play bounce passes with teammates. And I think he'll be a really, really important player for them. So, yeah, Sunderland looking as though the young players are going to look strong. The back line is looking maybe more in a better position than I expected it to be maybe a few weeks ago. And Granit Xhaka is there tying everything together. So, yeah, it's looking good for Sunderland. And they've got Burnley coming up, which they will consider a very winnable fixture. So if they're able to take that energy from the first game into the second game, maybe come out with 2 wins in a row, that's already a massive chunk of the points that they're going to need to survive this season. And I noted this weekend that Leeds and Sunderland picked up 10% of the points total that all of the promoted sides got as an aggregate last season. So we're already looking at the promoted sides, I think, being a lot more of a competitive element than they were in previous 2 seasons.
Yeah, I wonder with Leeds and Sunderland winning an opening day, whether it's reframed some of the people you lot thought might get relegated this season. Who knows? Gentlemen, we've got to call it. I doff my cap. JJ? John, bye-bye.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football